like to welcome back our panelists for the closing panel discussion. You heard from all of them as they presented earlier. I'm joined here by Mr. Liu Siyong, Ms. Janet Vincent, Mr. M. Nazri, Mr. Dickon Do, and Mr. David Rogerson. The panel will be exchanging insights on deploying AI. Facilitating this discussion is Mr. Oliver Tian, Honorary Advisor of APARA and Vice Chair of the International Alliance of Robotics Associations. Over to you, Oliver.
Thank you so much, Elle. It's such a discussion. I must say, it's just amazing the different content and experience sharing that we have over the last 3 hours. And the discussion has been so rich and so engaging that it was so difficult to actually stop anyone from continuing their conversation. We ended off just with an announcement on the signing of memorandum of understanding between APARA and MyFinB CEAI, and that's going to be leading us into a lot more discussion. In fact, we planned for this dialogue, this conversation in this panel to address some of the issues around intelligent transformation. But at the same time, I must say that there were a number of questions that came out in the audience that I picked up as well. And I think we certainly owe it to the audience to address those issues, whereby we want to talk about, some of the concerns and the discoveries that we have made. So I will focus a bit less around the planned topic, but to try and address some of the questions raised by the audience. The theme that we want to work on here, that we want to discuss, is the deployment of AI is certainly not just a project. It involves organization transformation. And today you hear from the different speakers all the different aspects that we are concerned with around this topic. So I'm going to just jump right in. I mean, without the introduction to all the speakers, you know all of them. They're really fantastic speakers, and it comes across with a whole wealth of global knowledge. I'm going to jump right in and ask the audience a couple of questions, as well as then allude to the questions raised by the audience. So first of all, I'm going to ask this question to Mr. Liu Siyong and Mr. M. Nazri. What do you think is different about AI in business transformation, in your view, that warrants keen attention from management and the workforce? Maybe, Siyong, we start with you, given that you discuss on the topic of the often overlooked pitfalls. What would be the one or two key things that differentiate AI deployments from the traditional business transformation process?
Right. I guess the first point that I will share is that when we talk about AI or intelligence, right, it is really a journey. It's not a project. It's not something that you kick off today and then you can have a fixed timeline to complete it, right? In our experience, it really is a journey. It's not about the end goal per se, but it's really about continuous improvement, how you can learn with the data that you have, right? So I guess that is kind of the key takeaway. The second thing that I think is important to take note is that deploying AI is a collaborative effort. It requires the whole of organization effort. And I think in our view, there are 4 critical pillars: people, process, technology, and also data, right? Again, as I alluded to in my presentation, when we talk about AI, people tend to focus, they don't focus on things like the machine learning models. They'll talk about the algorithms, but that's just only one part of the picture. Equally important is, do you even have the data in place to be able to apply, whatever fanciful technology that you want, right? So I think these are just important points for the audience to take note. Yep.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's very key. I mean, people always talk about PPT, right? People, process, and technology, but data is an important element. And I in my earlier presentation, I alluded to the fact that one big difference is around people behavior, right? People behavior being critical as well. So, Nasri, what do you think? How would you add on
Yeah.
Siyong's discussion.
I tend to agree with what Siong has shared, with an additional comment that at the end of the day, whether you're a senior or your top management in an organization, you want to know what's the ROI, you want to know what's the social impact of deploying AI. So, with the end in mind, when they talk about journey, in their minds, journey is like, wow, it's going to be long, it's going to be continuous, it's going to be costly, it's going to be resource intensive, and you got to have the talents, you don't have the talents, got to hire people, put up an ad, get a consultant. So in their minds, before they can even understand the ROI, or in this case, the SROI, the social return on investment, whether you're public, private, or non-profit, right? They start having all these barriers, obstacles, and get into a lot of academic discussions, like what Sion was mentioning, right? So they talk about what AI models, ML, is it trustable? Is it explainable? So everybody gets engaged in a very academic discussion, but missing the point, about, hey, what are we trying to do here, and what do we want to achieve at the end of the day? So because the term journey is embedded, and it's a reality, right? It's a fact. There's a journey, right? But sufficient attention and focus need to be given to the stakeholders who wants to adopt or transform the organization, right? By knowing the ROI. Okay, so that ROI is an elusive point that needs to be addressed, because there are a lot of barriers, there are a lot of costs. So all these need to be demystified. You need to demystify the so-called obstacles that leads to the ROI, or lack of clarity of ROI, right? So whether it's time, whether it's resource, whether it's talent, right? The people, process, technology that Sion was mentioned, this clouds the ROI. When you start getting into discussion of the old traditional models, ironically, oh, there's a model to deploy AI, right? But do you know there's a very traditional way of deploying AI models, and there's a very conventional new way of deploying AI models, or learning at least, right? So this is where we believe that we have to do something about it, raise awareness, educate them. If cost is an issue, how do you overcome it? If talent is an issue, how do we overcome it? If infrastructure is an issue, how do we lighten it? And if cost, if the visioning, if the vision and the alignment is off, how do we align it? So we must quickly address those through education. We must address this quickly through hands-on. We must address this quickly, like what Siong said, beyond project, but embedded into a culture of innovation. So I think that's all I have to say about that, Oliver, before passing on to the other panelists.
Sure, thanks. I think that's you have certainly given a very interesting point of view, right? I guess we all talk about the journey. So clearly, AI implementation is not just a scope, and in 9 months, in 1 year, you're done with it. You mentioned about culture, right? From the audience, there was a question around culture, which I like to kind of bring up to all of you, right? The question came from a distinguished audience who asked to share our views around working with employees of different cultures, right? Here, when we talk about change of behavior, which I alluded to, here we talk about culture of the organization, here we talk about people behavior. So how do we deal with different culture, and how do we bond them together so that we have this common goal, this SROI, that move towards the company eventually benefiting from the development of the AI system. I guess if we look at Asia, we have a mix of culture. You look at Latin America, there's a whole mix of culture. Europe has got a whole mix of culture. So I guess it's also going to be a learning process, right? Because it's going to be a learning process. So I'm going to turn to Janet, perhaps, to see what we can understand from the whole transformation of learning, and how is it going to impact based on the variable parameter of culture, which is a very pertinent point in terms of transformation. So Janet, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Oliver. I saw that question come up, and it's a really good one. And I think it harks back to a little bit what I was saying about understanding who our learners are, but also who our users are, and also what David mentioned about jobs to be done. I think there's a way here that we need to look and see who it is that we're interacting with, who our employees are, who our audience is for the solution that we're developing. And I think the better we can understand who those people are and what their particular needs are, the more readily we can address some of those. and I'm not even going to say issues, but those elements of things like, even when we look at culture as being one of them, but also things like equity, diversity, accessibility. So when I look at things like, when I'm addressing the particular needs of a particular learner, and I do a proper learning needs analysis to understand who the people are. And again, as myself and David were chatting earlier, at Learnovate as well, we do that jobs to be done where we identify the persona of our user or the persona of our learner, and look to see who is that person, what are their motivations, their barriers, what is their personality, where are they from, what are their challenges in their particular, whether that be geographic or cultural or accessibility issues. But I think it does come back to, number one, having an awareness and an understanding of who it is we're addressing with our particular solution. And number two, it's once we have that understanding of who those people are, addressing our solutions to the needs of those particular people, and having an awareness of, are there elements that we need to personalize, for example, to address the cultural differences in different communities and different geographic areas. Because again, sometimes it comes down to things like, language, or the way that we use particular terminology, for example. And that's something that I've addressed in learning, because I've worked in global learning design for a long time, and understanding that, what means something to one person might culturally mean something different to somebody else. So having that awareness of that there are those differences is really important. And I think from my perspective, and I'll let someone else talk about this in a second, I think for me, it's about using the technology. If we're looking at technology and AI, for example, it's using the technology to be able to personalize the experience for who we're dealing with and who we're aiming the solution at. So yeah, I can go to some of the others if they want to address that element of culture, but that's a great question.
Yes, indeed. I think that's a very good discussion. In fact, I was about to ask both Deacon and David to share their view, particularly around the fact on jobs to be done, and jobs to be done in terms of understanding by the different culture and different aspects of learning for the job to be done is going to be key. So David and Deacon, maybe you can jump in here and then talk about your views on this.
I was going to say something really sort of generic, actually, about ways of working and how they enable sort of cross-cultural thinking. I also had a lot of work in Asia, a lot of work in the US, a lot of work in sort of Europe, and I think and then I'll hand over to David to talk more about jobs to be done, because that's really his world more than mine. But so in the ways of working that we've been forced into during the pandemic, so lots of video conferencing and lots of use of technologies. We use a piece of kit called Miro, which is kind of virtual whiteboarding, but allows us to all congregate and so on. It also drives a need for things like the sort of quiet collaboration, so the ability for people to think and then commit their ideas and so on without actually having to necessarily put themselves on a stage, make a statement, proffer an opinion and so on. And I think that's really helped us. Between our Singapore and London office, we're working very effectively because everybody feels that they can kind of contribute to that. And cultures where people are a little bit more reserved don't get hounded out by those where people are rather more sort of, happy to put themselves forward and dominate a conversation. That happens a lot in the consulting industry as well, right? Everyone's got an opinion and thinks that theirs is best and that we should all listen to that. So I think that's actually helped us sort of culturally. But more on the jobs to be done, David, do you have some specific thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess just kind of tie it back to the the wider point around transformation. I think one of the things that needs to happen to be successful in this space is to be an outcome, to turn to be more of an outcome-driven organization, and jobs to be done plays a role in obviously defining those outcomes for your customers. They're not the only outcomes that are important. There are business outcomes that are important as well. But jobs to be done gives you a language and a framework of which to kind of bucket those things up and to tackle those problems in the right order and with the right priority. I would say there's this secondary challenge, I think, that goes along with that outcome-driven thing in terms of transformation, which is balancing up a kind of autonomy and governance. So it's a slightly a side point, but I think it's important in terms of how all of this comes together. There's no point just doing jobs to be done that sits in a silo. That's the same as doing AI and sticking that in a silo, right? You need to have the right culture in your organization to be able to join these things together. So often what we see is businesses having to go through a process of, because what you'll find is people in outlier groups kind of doing stuff. So maybe doing stuff in AI, maybe doing stuff in jobs to be done, maybe doing whatever, some innovation mavericks. If you've got innovation mavericks in your business, then you're probably doing it wrong, because you should all be being innovative, right? So what you end up having to do is to kind of tie things back down, create more governance and a little bit less autonomy actually to begin with. And then once you've built up trust and the foundations of that in your culture, you can begin to open up and give more autonomy to teams. But you should have the infrastructure and the foundations and the culture in place that will allow you to move forward independently in a much better way. Sorry, that's a bit of a windy route away from what we were talking about, but I thought it was important.
No, but I reckon that at the end of the day, this discussion on culture is key. I would suspect, and I guess the panelists can jump in and help me here. I would suspect that the same technology problem that we are trying to deploy may not be adopted in the same way by different organizations, depending on the local culture, right? Because some cultures will probably be more ready and probably the level of technology maturity would be more advanced. And the way they adopt the solution will be very different from another organization where the culture of technology maturity and learnability is slightly less mature, right? So that could also be different. And in between, one of the questions asked by the audience is soft skills, where there are tasks involving more soft skill related activities. To automate them, right, it's not going to be easier. So because the human factor may not be so present in the automation process, right? So maybe I'd like to draw upon anyone who would like to jump in here to talk about this, right? When we talk about culture, we talk about jobs we done, we know that the maturity of organizations can be different as they adopt the same technology, but the element of soft skills, how do we ingrain that into the automation process? Anyone wants to jump in on that?
Maybe I'd like to put some perspectives to it. Putting on hold the cultural differences due to nationality and organizational types, let's put that aside for a moment. But I would like to comment about the generational gaps, okay, the generational differences. So we have on one side the baby boomers, right? On the other side will be the Gen Y, Gen Z, and the millennials. Okay, so it's a real situation where in the next by 2030, right, 60% of the workforce the workforce will be composing of millennials. Okay, so it's a reality check for some countries where not only at the country level, but organizational level, majority of them will be coming from the millennial workforce. Okay, now then you bring technology into the equation, right? So there's the old school, so to speak, the matured people with experience, and then there's the what do you call the young workforce entering into the job, right? The organization. So the way they interpret things like AI, robotics, right, RPA, right, will be different for sure. So on one hand, you have people with immense experience, 30, 40, 50 years of experience, who feels intimidated, right? Because I'll get to the soft skills shortly. And then the other one will be a bunch of very hungry, very technology-centric workforce, or at least people who learn technology, who use, but without the experience. So in any institution, in a university, for example, they're very polarized. Many of the professors are very, very experienced, very matured, very expert. You can call themselves subject matter expert, but the technology may not be up to speed. They may not be up to speed the technology that is being deployed right now. But then they are very experienced. They've seen the evolution. On the other hand, there are young, professors joining the workforce in their 30s, in their early 40s, okay? And they have the latest in technology, but lack the experience that the senior counterparts have. So when you talk about soft skills, right, there is a need to bring leadership into the equation. So when you say leadership, means you look at it from an organizational perspective, not about you personally, not about the self-interest. So leadership is an important aspect. Leadership in AI is an important aspect of a soft skill that's needed to address these cultural differences due to generational gaps. And here we can also talk about soft skills pertaining to harmonization of different age groups, different generation, different knowledge base, and different culture and nationalities. Then you can bring in all the nationalities and all that, right? But primarily, it's about leadership in technology like AI, and then harmonization of the different perspectives and different contexts of how different people view the technology in a different way. Old school versus new school. I hate to use the word old school. I hate to use the word new school, but this is the, for lack of a better term, you need to harmonize this. So that is a very serious, important factor to consider when you want to do intelligent transformation for the organization, which is the theme of this discussion, I'm sure. Yeah.
Can I come in on this, Oliver? I think that's really interesting.
Sure,
and I
would
consider myself quite old school myself. And but I think the really interesting thing when we're looking at soft skills from a learning perspective, number one is how people learn soft skills in a digital environment. But what we're finding really interesting at Learnovate, and we're looking at like what we're calling transversal skills or 21st century skills, is how to assess and evaluate those skills. Like that's where the challenge is at the moment. I think that with hard skills, even in a sort of in a remote or online space, it's a lot more straightforward because you can have a lot of frameworks that will help you to assess those types of skills. But I think the real challenge we're seeing at the moment is, okay, development of soft skills being one thing, and something like leadership, as you were saying, but also like how do we then assess whether people have actually learned these skills in a real way? And I think that's something that's quite exciting, and it's something that we'll be looking at in the next in the immediate to the next few years, is how do we successfully and in a meaningful way evaluate and assess those types of skills. And I think obviously technology is going to have a huge part to play in that, and particularly AI, and how AI will address some of those particular challenges is something that's going to be very exciting as we look at these types of skills and these skills that that organizations are looking for now, because they're the kinds of skills that can transfer from role to role, and then for people in a kind of a lifelong learning sort of situation where they're moving from different positions, that they retain these sorts of 21st century skills. I think that's something that's going to be really interesting, and I just wanted to make that point. It's something that we're looking at the moment ourselves, and how do we assess those types of skills?
The issue around what we are addressing actually encompasses a little bit more, because in the maturity of technology, there is a whole discussion around moment of need. You want to be able to acquire certain knowledge, the right amount of knowledge at the time when you need that knowledge in order to apply it quickly onto the job. So I think, Janet, you're probably back now. So maybe you could comment the soft skill aspects of it and tie it to the moment of need as a discussion, and the rest of us can still jump in as well. Jeanette?
Yeah, sorry about that, Oliver. I didn't realize you couldn't. Did I cut out there for a minute? And I'm not sure what what you actually heard, but what I was talking about was the assessment of soft skills of 21st century and transversal skills, and how important that's going to be in the next. I mean, it is important at the moment, but it's something that we're looking at the moment. How do we, successfully assess 21st century or transversal skills in a meaningful way, and then how do we ensure that we're evaluating those skills and giving, and again, as others were saying, bringing the value back to the organization, like, so that we understand that the learning that people are getting is actually providing real value to the organization in a real and meaningful way that can be assessed and evaluated. So I don't want to go back over everything I already said. Hopefully you heard some of that, but I think it's just an interesting point to,
Sure,
when we look at things like soft skills, it's not just about, the replacement or the learning of those skills. It's about the assessment and evaluation of the skills, which is going to be really important.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So Young, from your experience with the automation process, right, and how you've helped companies move from the SE stage to the to B stage, right? How do you see this whole around soft skills, and how we can get the users of technology to be more conversant with technology?
Right. I think that's a great question, and I think I just want to also re-emphasize what Nasri mentioned just now. I think he was really spot on when he mentioned that there's kind of a changing of the guard in the workplace. The profile of employees are kind of slowly but surely changing. You have a lot more millennials who are joining the workforce, and I guess from my perspective, I think there is also a change in terms of the employees' expectations, right? maybe I'm kind of over generalizing some of the stuff, but if you refer to kind of the old school employees, they are kind of typically very focused on the tasks. They don't mind doing the same work over and over again. They like to specialize in the specific tasks or skills. But I guess for the millennials, it's more about pushing the boundaries, exploring the art of the possible, exploring new things, new technologies, new way of doing. So I think the nature of the employee expectation is really different nowadays, especially with millennials. And I think what it means is that the organizations needs to be prepared to meet the employee expectations. We all know that human talents is the most valuable resource any organization can have, right? And if you don't have good people, the organization will find it very difficult to survive, to thrive, right? And I just want to pose a kind of a very provocative question to everyone in the sense that, right now people are happy doing the work the way it is, right? They don't mind doing the repetitive, mundane work. But I think for the new generation of employees, they want to be pushed, they want to be challenged. And so perhaps maybe, in the very near future, for them to do the mundane, repetitive stuff, menial tasks, to them that can be considered kind of, abuse of human resources, right? So I guess really organizations need to think, how best they can meet the desires of these new millennials who are entering the workforce. And also back to your question, about the soft skill part, I guess that's precisely the point about automation, right? By applying intelligent automation to your business processes, what you get is what we call the triple win, right? Not only to the stakeholder, the owners of the business benefit, right? Because you get a more productive business, right? The management benefits as well. The customer benefit as well, because they get a more effective customer response, more effective customer experience. But also the employees benefit, and how they benefit is because now that they don't have to do the tedious work, they have time to upskill, to reskill themselves, right? And I think that really is the crux of the question. You talk to any employees from a decent sized organization, the number one challenge is that, they are so swarmed with work that they practically have no time to attend training courses and whatnot, right? And to them, training then becomes, or upskilling or reskilling becomes a burden, right? Because it's something that, they attend courses in the day, and then when they go back home at night, they need to catch up on work. So it becomes a burden. And I think this is where, by thoughtfully applying automation to the business, you kind of return hours back to the business, you return hours back to the employees, and they got time to pursue innovation, critical thinking, design thinking, those sort of stuff that really makes a difference to the business.
Oliver, could I just follow up with
you brought up. Sure.
Sorry, Oliver, I was just wanted to make a more general point, I think, off the back of Liu Xiong's there. So I think, looking from the other side of the telescope, if you like, from someone who's not necessarily embedded in the AI community, I think there's often a gap between the promise or the perception of what AI is and what it can do, and what's actually kind of applicable now, or what might be able to solve problems now. So, Liu Xiong there talking about kind of automation and all the benefits that can bring. But for many people, and it was discussed earlier as well, AI is just seen as this amorphous blob that can solve everyone's problems and no one's problems at the same time. So I think I think Dickon talked about it in our talk, right? How can you move the discussion? How can you move the tools and the material away, if you like, from IT departments or technology teams or innovation teams, and how can you put it into the hands of users, into the hands of salespeople or designers, and those people, I guess, in the front line of their job? And I think we need to do a better job of describing what AI is good for and what it's not so good for us, but certainly now, not what it could be in the future. So, it's not great for things that involve emotions or understanding or being adaptive in terms of learning or being empathetic. And we should probably not even be thinking about that at this stage, certainly not from a perspective of frontline changing services. That belongs in a university, and that's definitely where that should be going, right? But so a better way might be to think of it as more like augmented intelligence rather than this kind of artificial intelligence. How can we augment what we do in order to do things more efficiently or do things better? And like I said earlier, like it just provides this rich set of new affordances that we haven't had before. But you need to kind of put those in the hands of people in a way that's understandable, I think.
Great point, David. I think the whole idea of augmenting intelligence or augmenting human capability is a very relevant and important point. And I guess if I bring ourselves back to the beginning of the discussion, we talk about culture, right? Depending on the culture, depending on the state of maturity in the different organization, the deployment of intelligence solutions must fit into that environment and not just push the technology across just for the sake of it. In the interest of time, I'm just going to go round table for each of you to give one parting word. And the parting comment should be around what advice would you give to organizations, big and small, in the adoption of intelligent solutions, right? What would be a 1 or 2 sentence that you want to share? Advise organization who's exploring their journey down this path. I'm just going to go round table based on what I see on my screen. So, Soo-Young, can we come to you first? What would be your 1 sentence, 2 sentence advice for organizations?
Sure. My advice would be to start small. It's easy to get caught up in the hype, but there's no timeline for intelligent transformation. My advice would be to start small, learn about the technologies, get yourself immersed in it, understand the entire journey, and then I think you'll be in a good space.
Wonderful. Yeah, maybe we go to Deacon first.
I just say collaboration. Don't go and buy technology. Don't go and get a lot of really excellent tech capability in individuals and so on without thinking about how you're going to stick that into a team that can actually achieve what you need to achieve. And all the people that work for you currently have all got a lot to say about that. So that would be my bit of advice.
Thank you, David.
I guess be outcome driven and not technology driven.
Very good. Very, very short and sweet, powerful. Janet.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what David said really there is start with the problem. Start with the problem that you're trying to solve. What are the jobs that you're trying to get done? And then how can the technology support that? So start with the problem and end with the solution.
Thanks, everybody. This is a great discussion. I think I'm getting a lot of text messages on my phone now from people that I know about what you have shared. Very powerful. It looks like, and I personally believe in it as well, right? The intelligence solution is not an end in itself, right? Intelligence solution actually have to involve the human. It has to have a collaborative model where the human plays a very important part in the design of the solution itself, and hence, right? Look forward to the next session that we have, right? The theme of the next next webinar in the week to come is around human factor engineering, right? How do we put the human factor back into the design of solution? What are the considerations, right? And I believe that's going to be a very enriching and interesting discussion as we move there. All right, then. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for this session, and thank you to all the audience for joining us. We certainly appreciate your participation. I hope you have learned something from this session, and I look forward to seeing you again in 1 week's time, same day, on the 9th of September. We will talk about human factor engineering in AI and robotics. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening. Have a nice afternoon. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.